So welcome everyone, bonjour tout le monde. I just wanted to let you know that even though the majority of this little talk that we're doing is going to be in English, nous sommes bilingues. Alors si vous voulez poser des questions en français, n'hésitez pas. If you would like to speak in English or French, that is not a problem. So thank you so much for taking the time to join us today. We are going to be talking about the good, the bad, and the ugly in Government of Canada innovation. So I just wanted to take a little survey of the room here. I saw before how many people work in Government of Canada. Who here works in what they would call the innovation space in the Government of Canada? Okay, we've got some people. All right, well, we are going to be relying on you a little bit later on to share your experiences, because what we wanted to do today was share our observations from working in this space and also open up the conversation to anyone around the room who might want to reminisce, who might want to say, yes, we know exactly what you're talking about, or who might want to propose some solutions to our good, bad, and ugly. So we didn't actually prepare a presentation today. I'm sure that all of you here are very aware of the deck machine that sometimes innovation labs can become. You have to just pump out the decks and pump out the decks and the placemats. And we decided to not do that and just let everybody have a break from the technological errors that can sometimes happen. So you won't have to be distracted by our slides, and we can just talk about our experiences in the innovation space. So while we are going to talk about the bad and the ugly, we would also like to move at the end of our conversation towards a more optimistic lens in the innovation space, and that's when we're going to open up the room to comments and for you guys to share experiences as well. So take it away, Chamika.
Thanks, Ashley. I was just going to say, I think part of our rationale, we went through different concepts for the talk. So we thought, if you're in the innovation space, maybe we should bring a Festivus poll and have an airing of the grievances. That was one idea. The other one was just doing improv and have all of you just give us ideas, and we would just improvise and innovate on the spot. So we're kind of doing a little bit of that. We did structure our talk a little bit. I think what we did in our observations is from a systems design perspective, where there's kind of a macro level in government, which would be kind of the overall societal context, where it's highly interdependent and it's not really under our control. However, the decisions we make ripple up, and we don't have a lot of direct interaction at that level as public servants, but what we do at what we consider kind of the micro level, which is our individual interventions and the work that we do on our teams and amongst each other. And then there's kind of a meso level, which is the organizational level and how our departments, agencies, branches, and directorates are structured. So we kind of looked at it from a little bit of the micro level, somewhat of the meso level, and kind of realizing that would kind of ripple up to the macro level, but we'll mostly contain our observations to the micro and the meso levels.
All right, so with that said, I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the challenges that we're facing in the middle of the innovation space in government. And I'm pretty sure this is something that will resonate with a lot of people. Government is in a weird space because we have to continuously evolve our services and change the way that we deliver value to Canadians and our stakeholders in a way that meets expectations that are driven and set by the private sector. And I think sometimes we often forget, or we tend to forget, that we're not Google and we're not Apple, and we are dealing with legacy systems. And I'm not just talking about technology. There are technology legacy systems for sure that we have to consider when we're proposing new solutions. But we also have to consider the legislative framework and all of the barriers and challenges that crop up when you think about making a change, and that change might be awesome, but then you get to proposing the change and someone from your policy team says, no, you can't do that because there's legislation that dictates this, that, and the other thing. So people have been talking about digital ID in the last couple of presentations, and that in itself is a really interesting topic to think about when it comes to legislation, because a lot of people say, oh, well, if we're going to do this and we're going to share data and we're going to actually allow people to say they are who they are, there's privacy involved, and there are so many different challenges that arise if you start to pick away at privacy legislation and what that could potentially mean for providing a better service to people just by having us share information within departments, within different sectors and departments, and even across government. So we have our legacy systems that we have to contend to, and sometimes it's important to think about that when we are trying to measure how quickly government can actually innovate. So that's another thing that I think we're sort of lacking in government is a proper way or a fair way to measure innovation in the government space that actually takes into account some of the things that we are facing internally that maybe private sectors aren't facing. So, having a big idea and then getting that great next product out on the market is easier for a private sector company when you're not dealing with the same checks and balances that you have to deal with in government. One in particular is the ability to innovate based on taking risks and doing experimentation. So anybody who works for government knows that we have a very high standard when it comes to making sure that we are not spending money just willy-nilly. We have to be accountable for the public purse, and that can sometimes have a huge impact on the risk that we take and how far we're willing to push in order to do something innovative to provide better services to citizens. Another thing that I think is a challenge in the innovation space, and I think Chamika would agree, is that we talk about innovation, but it just seems to be this word that we kind of use that describes multiple different things. There's no clarity, there's no real definition.
Yeah, I think I was going to say, it kind of means simultaneously entrepreneurship, technology, and invention. And without that clarity on what innovation specific to the public sector and the services that we're providing for citizens means, it becomes very difficult to kind of even understand the different kind of systems that we should kind of approach, right?
Yeah, and I think another thing about innovation in government is that we often leave it to a certain set of experts. So we have, and this is not to say that I don't love you, Canada Digital Service, but we have the Canadian Digital Service who's responsible for really pushing design and designing with users. And then we have these little innovation hubs that are cropping up in all different departments. And if we just decide as public servants that innovation is the responsibility of those experts and those little pockets, it doesn't really allow us all as public servants to be the catalyst for innovation. So one of the things that really made me want to become an innovator, so to speak, was the fact that when I was delivering a program, I had a really hard time getting buy-in from anyone to improve the services we were delivering. So I would have a DG who says, oh, not this year, we're not doing a program evaluation, it's not necessary to make those changes. Or you try to run it up the chain and say, hey, we could be doing some user research to really figure out how we could make this particular program work better for our clients. And they're like, what? User who? No, that's not what you need to be doing. You need to go back to your desk and deliver the services because that's what your job is. So I think if we are going to continue to just say, work in a silo, innovation belongs over here, and innovation will go and tell you what you need to do, we're not opening up that space to allow people to contribute to the innovation conversation. And I will tell you one thing, from my own observation, everyone in government that I know is not in it for themselves. Everyone in government that I know wants to provide excellent services to Canadians, and they have great ideas. People who work on the front line, who talk to Canadians, talk to businesses, talk to our stakeholders on a daily basis, they know the pain points already. We just need to go and talk to those people. We need to give them the space to help co-create and co-design services with our citizens so that we're getting the innovation potential from everyone.
Yeah, I think it's really empowering each individual public servant to be innovative would really help. And I think it kind of what you're addressing, Ashley, part of what's interesting, so I have worked in multiple different sectors, private sector, and I'm back in public sector, but I worked in not-for-profit as well. And when you kind of look at the government space and you recognize, I think as we were having the conversation, we kept coming back to two kind of challenges. One was the organizational design, and one was the culture, right? And I think we say culture a lot without really understanding what that means. And I think culture is really change, and it's changing people, and people are very different but it's also recognizing that innovation requires diversity. So if I go back to kind of like a micro level and a meso level and a macro level, at the macro level, society is changing, right? We are now past multicultural, we're into intercultural society. How does that work? It's clearly impacting what we see outside. We don't always see that reflected inside. So in terms of the cultural shift, requiring a lot of change strategy and change management to actually reflect the needs of the citizen, I think it comes back to the organizational design and how we're designing the teams that we have in government to really be diverse, but not diversity for the sake of diversity, diverse and inclusive. Right? I think that was one of the things we kept coming back to in terms of one of the fundamental challenges, but also one of the greatest opportunities.
Yeah, for sure. So, having said that, I think it's important to say that we have a lot of great intentions in government. We have some really amazing policies, including the new policy on digital and service that is pushing us to think about how we are providing services differently to Canadians, and it's allowing us to consider how we can leverage data and how we can go and talk to our clients and how we can actually not just design with clients in mind, but design with our clients with them. So that's something I think is really interesting, and it's an issue that if you are in this space where you're continually trying to advocate for citizens and for users of our services, you will know that sometimes people say, oh yeah, we're designing with the users. But what they really mean is we're designing with the users in mind, and they have a lot of assumptions about what users need and want, and then they make interventions, whether those be process interventions or technological interventions, to try and meet those needs without ever really investigating to see if those needs are actually real, or making sure that their assumptions are moving in the right direction. And I think that in government, when it comes to really trying to leverage what we can do in the innovation and design ecosystem, we should be pushing to design with users. So actually bringing people off the street, if that's where your users are, or out of businesses, which is where ISED's users happen to be, to talk to you about services and to talk to you about their actual experience going through particular service experiences. There was one thing, and maybe Chamika would like to share this with you, an observation that I found very pertinent at a usability testing session that we did last week, where when they were asked the question, what government services do you actually interact with? The answer was?
None. I never interact with government unless I'm absolutely forced to. So it kind of tells you, and part of this challenge is really reflective. I mean, the constituency we serve are business owners, so time is money in business, so they really don't want to, and the mindset of an entrepreneur is completely different from the mindset of a bureaucrat, right? So part of when I was talking to people, because people come and tell you all the problems, like all the time when you say you're from government, so they were just sharing, and it was really interesting because a common theme was that it's not something they would naturally tend to go towards, and if they had to, they would just hire someone to figure it out for them, which is a very entrepreneurial approach. What was sad in all of that is that there are groups that we could probably be helping at the edges, right? Who wouldn't even know to come to us. So how are we making that accessible for them? And that's where the innovation can lie, right?
Exactly. So now that we're talking about innovation and all the great things that it could possibly do, I think one of the things that we can do in government when we're thinking about how to innovate is not just look at how we deliver services externally, but really take a hard look at how we're structured internally and figure out whether or not that structure itself is capable of supporting innovation. And that's not just governance, for example, although governance plays a huge part in it. It's also thinking about how siloed different departments are, how everybody is working on something by themselves, but the experience of government is an end-to-end experience. As a citizen, I don't necessarily see that this person and this person and this person are three distinct entities on the inside of government providing me with three distinct services. To me, it's supposed to feel like one particular service. So internally, we're not able to do a great job of holistically understanding the end-to-end experience, and when we are pushed to do that, we don't always necessarily find ourselves with the right incentives to work together to create what could be a very optimal integrated service experience that could be enabled by digital technology.
Yeah, I think part of it is also being realistic about who we're serving. Quite frankly, at the federal level, we don't always interact directly with citizens, which is okay. We need to figure out who is interacting and what we can leverage from their spaces, and then understand how we can create that space at the federal level to bring the different groups together and innovate on how services are provided. Right? I mean, that's a definite opportunity, instead of just everybody going at it with the good intentions of serving the user, but without a clear sense of who that user is. Or quite frankly, sometimes when we're in meetings, and you know this, with like people at the very high executive levels, they assume the user is a deputy minister. So that's another mindset to overcome.
So if I had to make a recommendation today, as we are often called upon in government to do, I would say that one of the things we could definitely do as public servants is figure out where our latent talent is when it comes to innovation, and give everybody the opportunity to innovate, to empower every public servant to come up with an innovation, to speak on behalf of their clients, to have difficult conversations when it comes to, maybe challenging some assumptions around who our clients are and whether or not we're actually making the right decisions. A lot of decisions are left to members of the public servant who although are highly specialized and have a lot of expertise in what they're doing, aren't always necessarily the people who are dealing on a day-to-day basis with our clients. So we need to get to know the people that we're serving better, but we also need to take a closer look at who public servants are, and we need to allow those public servants to have the space and to have I want to use the word power, but the opportunity to speak knowledgeably about how they can improve services to their clients. I think with that, maybe we'll start conversations.
Sure, sounds good.
Is there anyone who would like to share an experience?
Thank you very much. It's a great talk. You spoke a lot of. The question is, how do you change the culture of a department? Because sometimes you go work in an agency when department talk to each other through the director, and you're supposed to work on the same project, but people who do the actual work don't talk to each other. You have like this, I remember it's called the wall of confusion. So you throw like messages over a wall, and you read this paper, and you throw it back, and you do. And sometimes also innovation is driven from the top. So you want to leverage data, but the people who draw the plan don't know if the data you have there is available or supports the business case you're working for. So how do you, that's difficult, because everybody wants to do innovation, but how do you change the culture of the government agency? How do you change the structure to make it possible? That's hard.
So I agree with you that changing the structure is hard. I think one of the things that we can do to move in the right direction is actually start talking about it. I think Chamika and I decided that we wanted to propose this presentation this year at FWD50 because we often hear a lot about the happy, great stories about innovation, the success stories. And the success stories are great, and I love hearing about the success stories because it actually drives me to want to innovate more. But we also have to, anybody working in the innovation space also has to develop the mindset of, exposing some things that we aren't necessarily that happy to expose. So we're always talking about failing forward, but if you're looking at particular stories where people discuss their failures, in the end, it's always a success, right? So I think we need to talk very openly about things that fail and why they fail, and we need to talk openly about the barriers that we're facing every day as public servants, as executives, when it comes to trying to push innovation through. So I've been working in the innovation space for about 3 years, which is probably not as long as many people in this room, but one of the things that I find so difficult is how hard it is to get anything accomplished. And I always keep telling myself at the end of the day, the reason I'm in this is because of the potential. I see so much potential for what we can do, and I think we're getting to a space where we've been doing the innovation thing for long enough that people will start talking about the types of things that are blocking us. So this in itself is a good start. I'm sorry I don't have more concrete advice to give you, but I do think we need to start just openly discussing the barriers that we're all facing.
Yeah, and I would add, so I come from a background of organizational design and change management. I think it takes a lot of change management, and quite frankly, those people will be retiring soon. So I'm just like, by force of numbers, there will be change. My recommendation is really let's focus on diversity as a means to an end and not an end, because with more diverse people who are able to communicate differently to that layer, right? It's kind of that executive middle layer. I think that's how it happens, but in public sector, again, we go back to the org design. It's not structured that way, but eventually it will have to give in, right? The center will not hold. So,
is there anyone else who would like to share something?
Thanks. You've said a lot about innovation with public-facing services. How about services provided to other public servants and between departments? That seems to be a different set of challenges.
I would say that is probably the most significant challenge, because it is legacy IT systems, bizarre enterprise architecture, different technical challenges. I think the opportunity is to start experimenting from the inside out, because if people don't experience that service on the inside, they can't deliver it on the outside, right? And I really feel again, coming from a change management lens, it's often used for internal projects. I've been surprised in the public sector that we always want to focus externally, perhaps because we are held to transparency of public funds, right? So it's the public funds, therefore we spend it on the public. But again, you kind of see those legacy systems getting older and older and older, and they will not hold anymore. So it's really, the opportunity would be to take some internal projects and just run some pilots. Sometimes the fixes are so easy. I don't know, I've been in different spaces where it's the database is broken. Well, why do you even have a database, right? It's not hard to figure out how to migrate that data somewhere else. So I think, like I said, but it has to be focused, and it can't just be we need to fix all the infrastructure. We need to fix all, everything that's broken. Just pick one, but absolutely it has to start from the inside.
I think it's really interesting that you make that comment. I was in a meeting a couple of days ago, and we were talking about experimentation, and a representative from our human resources branch was there, and I heard this comment about how we needed to adjust the behavior of managers to better meet the policies that HR had in place. And I'm thinking to myself, I hired 20 people last year, and it was probably one of the most difficult things I've ever had to do in my life.
You got your black belt.
Yeah, I now have my black belt. It was hard, and every time I tried to do a staffing action, even if it was the same one as before, it was a different process. And I'm thinking, people who are providing services internally to public servants need to understand that they are service providers as well. And public servants, even though we're getting paid by government, we deserve quality services. So I've also been phoenixed. Anybody in the room been phoenixed? Want to put your hand up about that innovation? Yeah, okay. So we need to think about who we're providing services to internally, in addition to thinking about our external stakeholders as well.
Yeah, and I think something that surprised me coming back into the public service is how much space corporate support services do take. In most government departments, it's between 30 to 40%. Therefore, if we're looking for opportunities to innovate, that is probably a space ripe for innovation. And to not mistake, the classic mistake in public service that I've observed is mistaking process for progress. So not adding more process to the corporate support functions, figuring out how to focus on progress and better service internally.
Any more questions or a story that someone would like to share? Yeah.
Hi, you guys said that you were looking for good stories at the end of this, and where I am located, PEI, I'm fortunate enough to be a part of an application developers group, and in that group we work really hard to try to propose ideas and move towards trying to keep everything as modern as we can, and I know that's not maybe innovation section, but I think we try really hard, and I think that it's nice to see that despite some of the barriers, government still does try to make sure that we're modern and keeping up, and I'm happy to be a part of a group that does. So.
Thank you for sharing that. One thing I will note is that you said you aren't necessarily part of the innovation space, but that in itself, I think, is a barrier to our innovation. So thank you for sharing that. And you are part of the innovation space. And I'm glad to hear that there are little pockets of the public sector out there who take it upon themselves to make sure everything is as modern as it can be and that experiencers are as great as they can be. You want to do that one? Oh, she has a mic, Chamika. Oh.
Thank you so much. So as an interaction designer, one of our struggles is, you talk about going out there and just talking to users and clients. It takes us about like 6 to 8 months to actually get out there, talk to people, get user feedback in order to sort of start designing. How can you give us some more sort of advice to get that? Because I personally want to just go to a coffee shop, open my laptop and be like, hey, would you like to fill out the survey or try out our prototype? But we can't do that right now.
So if you're talking specifically in government, you're saying that there's a lag between the time that you start working and getting out and speaking to people. So I think one of the things to take into consideration is that sometimes you can do, while it's always great to go and talk to people personally, and I advocate for that all the time, there is a lot of research and a lot of data and a lot of knowledge that you can start to leverage before you even go and talk to a person to help you design services that are at least going to be closer to meeting the mark when you actually speak to a person. I'm speaking from personal experience here, so I don't know particularly what your experience is, but we are embarking on a large-scale journey mapping exercise at ISED, and for the first 3 or 4 months, before we even talked to a single human being, we went around the department and we said, hey, can you come and talk to us about the services you deliver? Can you come and talk to us about who you think your clients are and what kind of pain points they're experiencing? And can you give us any type of research that you already have that we can use so we're not starting from zero? I think that's another challenge. I remember when we were proposing doing this journey mapping exercise, we were facing all sorts of difficulties from everyone across the department because everybody assured us that they knew who their clients were and we didn't need to go do this research. And I think they started to come along the journey with us, and this is another positive thing, when we demonstrated to them that we weren't starting from zero, that we were actually going to leverage all of the knowledge and expertise that they had, bring that into the conversation, and actually rely on them throughout the process to make sure that we were checking back with them to see whether or not our actual research was aligning with what their expectations were. So I think I'm not sure. Interaction design is very technology specific. So I would say that start before the tech. Before you even start designing a particular solution, maybe the solution has been determined to meet a need. So you're designing an app or a website that does something in particular. Start before that. So start exploring what the relationship to the business is. When I say business, I mean business line. So what is the service that is being delivered? What is the value that you're offering through this particular interaction design? And then see how you can leverage that knowledge into your designs so that you understand what people will be looking for and expecting before you even get there.
Yeah,
so you can speed that up.
Yeah, I was going to jump in and just say there's such a glut of content out there already about the different expectations that people have. There is so little done around documentation review in government. There is so much content. So usually when we start our projects, before we even go and talk to people, to Ashley's point, we figure out who the user is specifically, and then from there, you can start prototyping. You can actually prototype with them. If you're not allowed to talk because of the writ period, there's still the possibility of getting people internally and having a multidisciplinary team internally to kind of run through those to really make sure that you've segmented your user to understand who that is before actually going out there. And then creating a space to bring people in. So I think a lot has to be done. So I don't know, most of the projects we've been doing up to 4 months of documentation review before actually even getting the idea in our head, because understanding the problem and how we contribute to the problem before even understanding where the solution is and talking to people about it, getting them to also acknowledge the problem. You don't have to show them something necessarily. It's just having a conversation with them. But the business problem exploration piece, I think, is key. We're out of time.
All right. Thank you both very much. It seems like a great way to end things with some upbeat stories. So really appreciate you running this kind of interactive dialogue. It's nice to not just have it all be talking heads.